Great, so we're out of time, but please in the front, I think we have a...
So one of the main issues with AI, machine learning, is to get back and to understand what the models came up with. And you mentioned one example that to me sounded counterintuitive. A company that actually brought forward the pushed back. Oh, no. If it pushed back, I have no.
But it's a good question, though. No, the explainability of the data, I think, is very important. Let me address that, if I may, because this is really one of the biggest challenge for us as scientists. So you start getting to machine learning, deep learning. So start looking at CNN, which is convolutional neural network, that has maybe thousands of parameters that are trying to find these really small, intricate relationships that are nonlinear between different parameters that takes data and try to figure out the model. So sometimes the technology that provides the answers is not easily explainable to the human. And that's one of the biggest challenges, because fundamental analysts want to understand why. And it's not necessarily clear to even the designer of the strategy itself why. It's just one of the things that we have to start to mature and accept. We know how the system works. We know how the process of machine learning works, how you try to minimize errors through random, picks, and how you create the mathematical computation to do what we call gradient descent and back propagation, which is some of the underlying technologies of machine learning. But when you get to the actual model that creates the actual result, it's not very clear what specific factor was the deterministic factor that made the decision that was made by the machine. And that's one of the challenges that we have, not us, any scientists. And the consumer has to somehow accept some of the results without fully understanding exactly what they came by. And that's one of the biggest challenges for the adoption of that technology.
Quick study that I ran through QuantDesk actually was the long study, and I found it the other way, where when the date came closer, that's where there was the alpha on the long side versus the negative side, and that's what I came up with. And I just chose to go that direction because I wanted to know what happens if when it goes this way. Added a few extra features to it that made sense, and we created an alpha strategy. But then that gives you the opportunity to use machine learning, then also look at the exact features that you're looking at, and then you could dive deeper to then understand and even research why there's alpha being driven there. And that's where when the human aspect comes involved to really understand what's being delivered.
So question for you guys. I found it very interesting that you guys think there's actually going to be more vendors over time versus less. So if I look at Google, Facebook, right, there's a lot of consolidation around those industries, right? Over time, we think of a computer, computational power, right? The more powerful it gets, the more expensive it is, right? A few people, maybe have the powerful computers. You would think there would be consolidation here, which of course would then point to, market share and then market power for the people who actually consolidate. Why, and maybe we can go around the circle, why in the world would there be more, not less, if that's the trend that I'm going with?
As an entrepreneur, we've built a really nice business out of this tiny little corner of the world called corporate events, and we do it better than anybody else. We're the gold standard. I get questions because we're so customer-centric. We're always asking our customers, what can we do to help solve your problems? And there is just a plethora of data opportunities out there that sit out there. They're not all billion-dollar businesses. They're smaller businesses, but there is huge opportunity to become a data provider, to be an economic lubricant for the marketplace, to provide better data to solve people's problems. And I see them all the time. Again, they may not be huge Google-sized businesses. There are a lot of little ones, and then you get into the whole roll-up and all those other types of things. But the opportunity is out there. It's always been out there, and it probably will always be out there.
Add one part to that is I think over time there's going to be more and more actual sources of alternative data. But eventually, over time, I believe the funnel by which it's delivered to the investment community will actually start to consolidate.
This is a good question. So I'm telling you what's happening in the real world. I get not a week passes by where I don't get a phone call from some data provider who wants to somehow monetize their data. This is definitely an issue that we have a very fragmented space. There are very few large data providers that are dominating the revenue share from dollars perspective in the space. And there's a ton of, I would say, very small, esoteric, unique data sets that are trying to find their way in the market. It screams consolidation. So you have a very, very valid point. You see some of that consolidation done in the context of data aggregators. You see a lot of big companies that are trying to create some sort of a hub or marketplace for all these data sets together to coexist under one roof. That may eventually lead to some sort of consolidation to be larger companies, because some of those small data sets, no matter how valuable they are not as fortunate to have the capacity that these folks have, and are not able to survive for a long time. And so we see certainly eventually some form of consolidation that's happening in the space.
I agree with that. I also think that definitely consolidation is a trend that's happening right now. But I also think it's not really about consolidation as an acquisition. It's more like platform, like more like platforms. And also, it's important to emphasize that domain expertise is very important. Like, I would rather talk to a smaller vendor. Let's say we're talking about like litigation data or talking about patent data. I would rather talk to someone who's a patent attorney and they partner with a data scientist, and then they partner with a business development person. Maybe they have better understanding of how to extract features from that data, how to work with the data to give me what I want, right, as a data buyer, rather than going to some big data vendor for whom is just one of their data offerings. So I think that's the reason why we mentioned more data vendors out there.
How do you see, both from the data provider side and also on the consumer side, consumer of the data, the strategies or technology strategies and such, how in terms of data anonymization, is that already in place, or do you see that change as the regulations come into force?
I won't answer the question directly. Wall Street Horizon deals with 100% primary source publicly available information. I will tell you that our clients, particularly the banks, the large hedge funds, and the buy side, we do find more and more compliance departments that are asking us to, and really put us through the ringer to make sure that, the data is clean, the data that they want to know the provenance of the data. And so part of our process, we're happy with it, but our process is that we can show them, and it makes it much easier because that's what they're looking for, to understand where this data is coming from and to make sure that it is not, insider trading, inside information, all those other types of things. And so that's part of your question, I think, is that the consumers of this type of data, of alternative data, are getting much smarter about how to ask for and how to even ask the questions about making sure that the data is clean and safe and viable to use, so they don't run afoul of securities laws.
Anonymizing the data is really important. I think it's the right thing to do because of morality in general, but I think it's something that needs to happen, and does not necessarily take away from the value of the data. Because if you can create some sort of anonymized association of a persona, are you a high income bracket? I don't know who you are, but you belong to that jurisdiction, and I can pass on some behavior that could be predictive. That's kind of how most of the people that we work with are acting upon. The goal is to create some sort of a grouping or aggregation of data, anonymized, that could be informative for the financial markets. And that's the challenge that we have to work with. I know it'll be really nice to know the individual specifically, but it's really not necessary for our research. We're looking at trends, looking at aggregation that are much more informative than each one individually.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly touch on data privacy issue. It's definitely a big deal for the buy side now. So if maybe a couple of years ago we were focusing on negotiating the price in terms of the contract, now it's all about compliance. It has to go through 7 circles of compliance to get approved, because if I have like 3 intermediaries between the data source and me as a data buyer, I have to make sure that they have all the contracts in place, because if somehow I get data of some guy who resides in California, I'm in a deep trouble as a hedge fund. And if you think about this issue, and as a hedge fund, I don't even need this information to begin with. And if you think about it, we just mentioned that China is a threat for the United States in terms of arms race for AI. And it's not only because they have more data, because they have more people using internet. It's also because they're not so paranoid about personal data and about sharing data with private sector and using it for analytics. So it's kind of a big issue. I think it's a subject for a separate discussion, but something definitely to think about.
I think we are going to wrap up, if that's all right, Barry. And so thank you, everyone, for coming. That is a very interesting. We've actually written extensively about that as well. It's an issue that we'll be looking for the next year. And thank you for coming. Please enjoy a cocktail and ask any questions if you have after the panel. Thank you. Thank you.